Hey guys, hope you guys are all staying well and healthy and safe. So today for the presentation on scientific misconduct in the field of biology, I would like to discuss the Italian surgeon Paolo Macchiarini. Um, Paolo Macchiarini, Dr. Macchiarini, was well known for his regenerative medicine. Uh, he really, I guess, put all his effort into making an artificial trachea to help those with damaged respiratory systems, such as like tuberculosis or something like that. He was really, really searching to find a way to help these patients. He was actually so in tune and like compassionate about helping these people that he falsified research in multiple articles saying that putting the trachea in rats and doing this on animals was working when multiple people actually were understanding that it wasn't working and were kind of just, I don't know if they were just blatantly disregarding it or just honestly not really thinking about it, like thinking just, oh, it happens all the time. But I don't know. He's treated over 25, 30 patients. Some of them, most of them, died prematurely or had following complications after the trachea implantation. Um, yeah, he worked for Karolinska Institute in Sweden. I'm going to talk about them a few times today. They also were very blatantly disregarding his scientific misconduct. There was multiple people who you'll hear me refer to them as whistleblowers throughout this presentation that told the institute that, hey, this guy is like previously guilty of scientific misconduct. You should look into him. His records don't match up. His article doesn't match up with his hospital records. A bunch of things went on during the scandal, and we're going to talk about them a little bit. So first, we're going to start off with the synthetic trachea. Basically, what a synthetic trachea is you have a damaged trachea, and somebody donates one to you. The donated trachea is going to be decellularized. All the donor cells are going to be taken out of it. So it's basically just tissue almost. And then using a bioreactor, they're going to take all of the patient's stem cells and plant those into the trachea. So hopefully it's going to build the new outer lining, a new epithelium, basically a whole new trachea strictly made out of your stem cells. Regenerative medicine, regenerated an artificial trachea. That was the goal. Here you can see this is what the trachea would look like. Little, I wouldn't even call it plastic, I guess you could say. So yeah, he was basically implanting these into people with respiratory issues, hoping to save their lives. But it comes to find out that he really wasn't doing much good, and he was actually causing a lot of harm, to be honest with you. Yeah, so now about the patients. The first patient to receive a trachea transplant at the Karolinska Institute was an Icelandic man. A few months after his treatment, he came back and was experiencing a lot of pain swallowing. Sometimes breathing caused pain. And when they re-evaluated him, they found out that he had actually developed holes in between his trachea and his esophagus. And they tried putting some stents in him, trying to make him close up the holes. Hopefully everything's better. Eventually, he actually had to get his esophagus removed. And I think 5 months after the surgery, he ended up dying due to complications from the implantation. The thing about all of this is Macchiarini, like, consistently told his patients that there was a very, very small risk, like this is proving that it works, like everything's a go, like it's okay, like, but what they didn't know is that he was hiding stuff in his articles that were published. He was keeping information that was crucial to them to know about, like, what's going on, like what he's about to do. And he just gave people the wrong impression, and honestly, it eventually ended up costing them a lot. This right here is a sad story, and I'm sorry if this upsets anybody. But this is Hannah Warner. She was one of Dr. Macchiarini's patients, and she was the youngest person ever to receive a biomedical or bioengineered organ. Unfortunately, 2 months after the surgery, she passed away due to complications from the surgery. And When New York Times reached out to Dr. Paola Macchiarini, he told them that it was her native tissue that was very fragile. It was never the trachea that was a problem, which is just like, yeah, it was not you, it was something else, but you knew that that could have happened and you never said anything about it. Just a lot of hiding going on here. Let's see. The investigation. There was another patient, a Turkish woman, and she came back after her surgery with the same complaints that the Icelandic man had, and the people that had worked on her were very, very suspicious, per se, about like why is this man's regenerative medicine that's working so greatly not working and actually causing these people to be like mutilated almost. So the basis of the investigation was after she came back with these complaints, the whistleblowers, Dr. Let me find his name. Sorry, Dr. Carl Henrys Grinema was one of the fellow doctors and surgeons that was working with Paolo. He decided to get some other doctors that also worked on these cases with him and basically built together a report. It ended up being 500 pages long. It ID'd the synthetic trachea as the problem and not the native tissues, so they exposed that. They also exposed the fact that he was suppressing critical information from his articles and publications. They found out that he actually invented fake biopsies to prove that there was regenerative tissue repair, I guess you could say, in the trachea, but they were fake biopsy pictures. Like, he really went to all, and it was found that there was no evidence to like a growing line of cells in the trachea. Like, there was never like any progress showing that this actually worked. So he was just putting this stuff in the paper saying it worked, and everybody was just agreeing with him because they thought he was some superstar surgeon. But meanwhile, he was just a liar and honestly like a terrible person. Actually, the Karolinska Institute was informed about his involvement in such things. So the report that got out from the whistleblowers was given to the Institute, and they kind of shoved it under the table, disregarded it. But a copy of that report actually got out to New York Times. And when New York Times found out, they decided to... New York Times decided to hire a private investigator to investigate the articles and publications with Dr. Macchiarini and hospital records. They actually found that the two did not relate, and they told the Institute about it. They said, hey, like, look, like, what he has in his article here does not match with hospital records, like, something sketchy, like, you should investigate this guy, like, put further. Originally, they rejected it. They said, no, like, basically clear of all wrongdoings. In 2016, a Swedish documentary came out called The Experiments. They interviewed him, asking him about his surgeries, and he had no idea that they were making a documentary and they were about to expose all of his dirty work. And basically that's when the Institute reopened their investigation, found out that he was guilty of scientific misconduct, removed him of his contract, fired him from the Institute. The Swedish Board for Scientific Misconduct Review and all that, they actually were going to trial him for manslaughter due to the patients that died prematurely to this problem. Right. The scientific misconduct that took place. Obviously, as I've stated before, there was a lot of falsified information, a lot of crucial information that was kept quiet. One of the whistleblowers actually stated that he cited countless failures and that human experiments were disasters and that these people were basically dying. Like half the patients that he worked on died, and that was nowhere to be found in his articles. Another part of scientific misconduct is unnecessary medical exemptions. Medical exemptions are basically like, okay, so this is an emergency and we need to get it done now and there's no other thing happening. Basically, you need to be in like dire needs for a medical exemption to take place. For most of his patients, if not all of them, he claimed that they were medical exemptions and they were in dire needs. But one of the whistleblowers, as I mentioned his name before, Carl Grimio, he mentioned that all the patients were in good, healthy, standing condition before the surgeries. So, as we all know, Paolo Macchiarini lied in his reports and falsified information. And basically, he also reported that these patients were healthy, although, as I said about the Icelandic man, he came back a few months later reporting pain, had holes in his esophagus. Like, obviously, he was not healthy. Yeah, so those are some of the scientific misconduct that takes place in all of this. Consequences. Basically, this is the institute he worked out. They, as I said before, turned their heads to multiple occasions of people literally coming to them and saying, hey, like, you got a bad apple, check it out. And they were just like, oh, like, no bad apple here. They turned their head to inaccuracies, misleading information, data fabrication, unjustified treatments, and multiple lacks of ethical approvals because, as I stated before, that most of these people were healthy enough that they didn't need the synthetic trachea, like they had other options. It wasn't like that or they were going to die, which Paolo Macchiarini was like, yeah, these people are going to die. That's what he put in his reports. That's what he told the hospital so he could get these exemptions. Consequences. One of the first consequences were the retraction of all 6 articles across all publications were taken out. He was fired by the institute. He was nearly charged with manslaughter. He dodged that bullet. I guess they didn't have enough evidence stating that the trachea was actually what caused them to die. So he dodged the manslaughter charges, lost his license, lost his job. At the institute itself, there was multiple resignations, including the president. The president stepped down. Several of their top officials had either been stepped down or fired, such as the General Secretary of Noble Assembly, the Dean of Research. So there was a lot of people fired. A lot of people had to resign due to everything that went on.